Scorching heat is expected to continue hitting North America along the United States Pacific Northwest and southern Canada. The recent heat wave has taken temperatures to record highs and claimed over 100 lives in the state of Oregon alone, and hundreds of related deaths in British Columbia. Sweltering conditions have also buckled roads, melted power cables, and caused infrastructural damage. Authorities have called the heat wave horrific, unprecedented, and dangerous, but it seems that the worst is far from over. With global warming on the rise, heat waves are becoming more and more concerning all across the planet, endangering human lives, well-being and the environment. We discuss how societies are being affected and what action is needed to prevent or at least minimise the fallout. For this, we connect with Brandon Block, housing reporter for The Olympian. We also speak with Nicholas Bond, principal research scientist at the College of Environment in the University of Washington. A warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And, well, to go straight into the discussion, really, Mr. Block, starting with you. Temperatures hit record highs in Olympia, where you are, and that actually surpassed a previous high of 104 degrees Fahrenheit in July 2009. So what really has been the impact, the scale of the impact of this unprecedented heat across the state of Washington in terms of the day-to-day life in your communities as well as public infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Soo Young. It's nice to be here. So yeah, temperatures in Olympia, which is like the rest of the Pacific Northwest, usually a pretty temperate, mild place, got up to 109 last week, which is, like you said, really just unprecedented. The previous high being 104. Even that is very, very rare. Usually in this corner of the country, summer is highs in the 80s. So for it to be 109 is really just something that most people aren't used to dealing with. And especially for folks who are living in substandard housing or for people who are homeless, it can be really dangerous being outside in those temperatures. And, you know, the other thing about this region of the country is that, honestly, most people don't have air conditioning, even middle-class people and people who are living in nicer apartments. It's just not very common. So it really was, I think, kind of a shock across the board.
And Dr. Bond, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, were climate scientists like yourself surprised by just how severe the recent heat wave was?
Oh, yes, definitely so. And we have heat waves from time to time. We've had them in the past and certainly have them in the future. But just the scale of this one, both in terms of how much the records were set by, the duration also. We generally have cooler marine air kind of come in after a hot day or two, but much longer lasting. And so I didn't think we would get anything of this severity until much further into this century.
And Dr. Bond, now the heat wave, many say that it was driven by a particularly strong heat dome. So how do heat domes really work, and what made this one so severe this time around?
Yeah, that's right. A heat dome is a kind of a new term amongst the public in terms of weather events, and what it refers to is a large ridge of higher than normal pressure that extends well up into the atmosphere. And so that that causes stagnant conditions. And when you have the warm air associated with that ridge, it's kind of reinforced by sinking motion that compresses and heats that air. And so it kind of has a mechanism to kind of build itself even stronger and stronger. We've had them before, but this one was much stronger than we've ever seen before. And in part, it actually had its start a couple of weeks beforehand when it was really hot in the southwestern part of the United States. And it kind of moved up into just the right position to deliver some extreme heat here to the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, Mr. Block, the rising temperatures have left many exposed to the sweltering heat, and particularly those without air conditioning or the kind of spaces where they can really seek refuge from this heat and cool down, as you mentioned before. Some of the worst affected people being unhoused people. Who have been the most vulnerable and, I suppose, the worst affected people throughout this severe heat crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think the effects are felt pretty broadly, like I said, because for one, it's just fairly uncommon to have air conditioning in this part of the country. But I do think probably the most vulnerable people in this case are going to be people experiencing homelessness who are living either in tents. We did see a couple cases locally of people who died of heat exposure while living in travel trailers, which is like an RV or some form of portable transportation that people also live in. So it does seem like the people who are most affected are just those who are living in some form of substandard housing, whether that's an RV or a tent, and just don't really have access to those cool spaces. There were in Olympia, we had the city opening a cooling center to provide people somewhere to go. And I think that had a huge positive effect. I think it probably prevented numerous unnecessary deaths. That's sort of, I'd say those are the most impacted people.
So there are clearly social implications there beyond the health implications as well, and that's one of the many reasons that scientists point to climate change and global warming as very concerning issues that we need to deal with. And there are also major factors that might drive abnormal weather phenomena around the world, like this heat wave that we've seen. So really, Dr. Bond, what are the most damaging human practices that contribute to the worsening of these related weather events, particularly these heat waves that we've seen?
Yeah, of course, the important part of global climate change is the warming that's occurring. And we know the physics is very solid and well understood there, that fossil fuel combustion means emission of greenhouse gases, and the effect of those increasing concentrations in the atmosphere is to make for hotter temperatures and a hotter ocean too, for that matter. And so that is essentially the problem is that we're still burning fossil fuels at a very high rate, and we basically have to slow the rate of fossil fuel combustion as soon as we can, because one of the insidious parts about the whole problem is that the CO2 that is produced with fossil fuel combustion stays in the atmosphere for decades, even more than a century. And so the sooner we act in a serious way, the less warming there's going to be.
And of course, Dr. Bond, scientists like yourself, you've been warning about the dangers of climate change and its devastating impacts for years and years. There's been global discussions around this, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Climate Agreement. But what action do you think really needs to be taken in order to make a substantial change to this, a meaningful change? And what are the risks of further inaction?
Yeah, and a great question. And there's no single action. There's no one silver bullet is the expression that will solve the problem. So we have to take multiple approaches, obviously try to go to more renewable energy sources and more conservation, just kind of limit fossil fuel combustion. And as I mentioned before, because what we do now lasts for a long time, the real key there is relatively rapid action by the world as a whole is really necessary to keep the warming that is bound to occur, to keep it at moderate rather than extreme levels.
Now, Mr. Blogg, going back to the situation in America, the news of the fatalities and the fallout from the heat waves is very devastating. It's been devastating all around the world, and especially for you when last weekend, the July 4th weekend, it was supposed to be a celebratory one, but it really must have been very emotionally tough for you to cover as a reporter on all these fatalities and this impact that the heat waves have had on your community. So how was the process for you in covering all of this?
Yeah, I think it definitely was emotionally difficult, as it can be, when covering a topic like homelessness. You're sort of constantly confronted with just the extreme difficulties of everyday life for people without a home. So that can definitely take a toll, and especially when something tragic like this happens. It definitely becomes hard to sort of compartmentalize, which I think sometimes you have to do in this profession. But I guess part of the way I try to deal with it is reminding myself that it's important to get this information out there. The process of it, of calling up the coroner and asking if someone died of heat death it can sometimes feel rather morbid and intrusive, but it is important, I think, that people know what's happening and have this information, because and hopefully it spurs some sort of urgency on the part of lawmakers and people with ability to make decisions. So
I see, and this is what do you hope to see from public authorities to really help coordinate a better response to future heat waves as they are set to happen? And in terms of, particularly in terms of supporting the most vulnerable people in society who really don't have many options in terms of escaping the heat.
Yeah, I think from a climate perspective, Dr. Bond will probably have a better answer for that. But in terms of the immediate effects of if next year there's another similarly severe heat wave, I think it is going to be actions like opening cooling centers and just really being prepared for something like this to happen again. I think it's sort of not an entirely new, but something of a new phenomenon. But I think now that we know that it's very possible and even likely that something like this is going to happen again, I think the local governments definitely need to be prepared to be doing things like that. And of course, with something like homelessness, it's such a pervasive problem. On the West Coast, in Washington alone, there's more than 23,000 people who are experiencing homelessness as of the last count, and the methodology they use for that is sort of results in not counting everyone. So we know actually that the scale of the problem is much larger than that. So that's going to take a really more sophisticated and long-term approach.
Right.
It's a much bigger problem.
These people, as you said, they don't have anywhere to go, so there's really no way of escaping the heat, and also the night temperatures are getting warmer and warmer as well, and obviously that's very concerning. And well, Dr. Bond, how do you see this? How do you think, can heat waves actually be prevented, or at least controlled to a certain extent? And what do you think authorities should really do to prepare for future occurrences?
Yeah, thanks. And the heat waves are weather events, and we don't have any control or influence on those, but we can do something about their impacts. And in particular, there's the urban heat island effect, when there's just pavement and especially dark surfaces. That much more energy is absorbed from the sun, and it's that much hotter. And so we can do things about making our populated areas more hospitable. It sounds kind of trite, but planting trees and painting roofs a lighter color to reflect the sunlight rather than just heating it up that much more. And so there are steps like that that can be taken, but I think the most important point here is that as the climate continues to warm, the odds of having extreme heat waves goes up. And the very strongest ones will be that much more severe. So what we really have to do as the world society is do something about trying to limit global warming itself. Because while the Pacific Northwest had its turn a week ago, conceivably it will be East Asia next time, then Europe, and there's been devastating heat waves around the world, and so we're all vulnerable to them.
You're very right, Dr. Bond, and well, due to time, I'm afraid we'll have to end the interview here, but that was Brandon Block, housing reporter for The Olympian, and Nicholas Bond, principal research scientist at the College of Environment at the University of Washington. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you, my pleasure.
For your interest. Yeah, very good.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.